Okay, we'll proceed.
You're smarter than Larry Mark.
You ready, Darrell?
Why's that?
Everybody's paying attention.
All right. We will move on to our National Wildlife Refuge Proclamation, which is Proclamation 13-07. This one should be a quickie. We only have a few national wildlife refuges that we set regulations on, and it's since they're federally managed, they send us what recommendations they have, and we put them in proclamation for them so they can be enforced in the state of Tennessee. There's only minor changes, and just to highlight, there's a couple of things on Chickasaw and Duck River bottoms, and then Tennessee National Wildlife Refuge. There was a couple of tweaks, and again, we had minor edits that we discovered later on. If you look at the proclamations, the final proclamations in your packets, anything that's listed in those proclamations is currently up to date and is intended what we plan on passing. But pretty much we more or less received the recommendations from the federal agents, and then we put those into proclamation for them. And so at this point in time, we conclude the NWR recommendations, and the ball is in your court.
Does anyone want to make a motion for Proclamation 13-07?
Second.
Any more discussion? All in favor? All opposed? Anybody from the audience have any questions about Proclamation 13-07?
All right. At this point in time, I'm going to go back to a slide that I used back in April. And we'd like to bring up Proclamation 12-17. This is a current proclamation. It is our non-protected and species deemed destructive proclamation. And our agency did not come forward with a recommendation to change this proclamation, but there was something that we did want to inform the commission about. Within that proclamation, there is some language in there which allows anyone that is currently on a lease to assist the landowner in the killing of those animals. That lease exemption is set to expire July 31st of 2013. At this point in time, our agency is not recommending any changes to this proclamation, which would mean that that expiration would take place. And at this point, I would turn it over to the commission for discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I'm looking at the proclamation that was included in our packet, 1309, and on page 2 at the very top, the two things that I was wanting included have indeed been included in this, Darrell.
Yes, we are not recommending that.
Okay.
In case the commission made a change and went with your recommendations, then that is what the proclamation would look like. That is not what the agency was recommending, no changes to 12-17.
I guess I'm recommending to the committee what Darrell's not recommending, and that is Proclamation 13-09, as included in our packets, has got the information that I wanted included, and I would encourage the committee to approve it. Did I handle that right?
Do you want to go over, Harold, what it says?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The two things that I was requesting, number one, the authorization of lease members by landowners for wild hog eradication expires July 31, 2015. This reflects a 2-year extension to the deadline that is scheduled to expire this year. The sole purpose of this extension is, I believe it has caught some of us on the commission and some of our staff that's caught us by surprise. We all knew the date. It's just that after the hog issues were resolved about 1.5 years ago, I believe we forgot. And I have to believe if we forgot, the public forgot. I want to make sure that we're giving the public adequate heads-up period. I will not be seeking any extensions after this deadline. This is the deadline, and this will be our formal notice in that regard. The second item really has to do with the issues that we've been dealing with in Region 3 related to some agricultural issues in McMinn County. And this, subparagraph 5 reads as follows. This proclamation acknowledges the significant importance of Tennessee's agricultural industry to the state's economy and well-being. It is further acknowledged that wild or wild-appearing hogs have a growing detrimental impact to this industry. In consideration of this, and noting in particular the challenges faced in dispatching wild hogs throughout a crops growing season, the executive director may authorize the use of alternative manner and means of dispatching wild hogs by agency personnel and or their representatives to protect agricultural property from such impacts. Again, in the past year and a half, we've already had new methods that are being tried and used. Case in point, the helicopter. Our staff themselves have been creative on the trapping. There's other methods coming on board, and the folks who have these crops, we're having hundreds of thousands of dollars damage each year to these crops. And when the corn is first planted, it's pretty easy pickings for the hogs, but it's also easy for us to take care of the hogs at night because they're in the wide open. However, when that crop begins to head out, it makes it much more difficult on our folks. A lot of my words to say, I want to acknowledge that the director has the authority to use alternate methods as deemed appropriate to protect agricultural property. This is specifically an agricultural paragraph here. That's it.
Well, since Commissioner Cannon's not on the Wildlife Committee, I would suggest, and I think properly, that perhaps you could get the staff to draw that motion appropriately and make the motion tomorrow during the consideration, because.
When do I need to do it?
Yeah, I think that's the proper way to do it, and, you know, I don't know that the staff has a comment about extending the leases, whatever, because I'd probably support both of them, but I think the proper way to do it maybe is get them to draw it up so you can properly make it and do it at the commission meeting in the morning. So I think, unless the chairman has a different opinion, I think that's how you probably ought to do it.
You could still vote on this and then send it tomorrow.
Yeah, yeah.
Still need to vote on the proclamation and get rid of it.
And Mr. Chairman, I would just ask a clarifying question on what exactly this is, for whether it's an amendment or a proclamation, because I've got my packet in front of me and I wanted to make sure that I've got clarifying questions that may or may not be right to ask now. And so when we get to that point, I just want us to clarify what this is that we're specifically going to take action on today, if anything.
And I guess I'm a little bit confused as to whether staff agrees or disagrees with what is being proposed based on and I wasn't here at the last meeting, so maybe that's my problem. But is staff opposed to Commissioner Cannon's suggestions, or? And I'm not trying to create
We
a
did
debate
not.
here, but it would be fun. But go ahead.
Bring it on. I'm ready.
Our recommendation was not to change this proclamation and leave it as is so that lease exemption does expire.
And Commissioner Woodson, your question is fair, and forgive me if I'm confusing this, but the proclamation I have in my packet, as written, has the language that I wanted to see incorporated in the proclamation. So I don't know if the committee acts on this or something else, and but I'm supporting however this is written in the book, and whatever the proper protocol is, I'm for this.
Mr. Chairman.
I guess this would be an amendment to Proclamation 1309, the wording that's in our packet.
We consulted legal last week to figure out whether or not it would be an amendment or we just repass a new proclamation, and it could have been either or. And so it was prepared as if Commissioner Cannon, his recommendation.
Make it a proclamation on its own.
Yeah, they both accomplish the same thing.
So both his suggestions in this,
Yes, I can show you.
one of them's here, I see,
Again,
but I don't
the
see.
this
Then number
that's
five.
being referred to,
Okay.
is it Proclamation 1309? Is it in the packet in the very back as the last page, because
At the top of page 2 is that language I was reading.
the ag language. Right.
Where is the proposal by staff?
I think the confusing thing is that the staff had already anticipated him making the amendment, so they included it. So on the back page of 1309 is the language that he is suggesting, so all we need to do, and I move that the committee pass Proclamation 1309.
I have a question. The language of the leasing question, first, I appreciate, so if I may make sure, I'm gonna ask my clarifying questions now then. We are on 1309. We are considering an extension of 2 years on the lease, as notice. Is that accurate? Okay. As I understand, and so Commissioner Cannon, thank you very much for bringing this. Just a few clarifying questions. The original lease length was 2 years. That's right. I think it's, and I really would love to hear from the staff on this, and so I guess I'll be a little careful about a strong opinion on it. It does make sense, as I understand it, that we have not reminded the public of the notice. I will say that we, whether it's through statute, rule, or regulation, once an extension is given or a lease is granted, public notice isn't necessarily required, but I think it would be proper form for us to considering extending. I do have a little bit of a concern of the length of time, given it's the original length of the original lease, and our purpose is public notice. And I'm just wondering if a 2-year extension makes the most sense versus a year extension, which is 50% of the original extension. And so I guess I'm wondering that reasoning behind 2 years. I see public notice, even though it's not required. I think it's proper, and it feels inclusive and very much like the right thing to do. But 2 years does seem like an awfully long time for folks to potentially forget about it again.
Point well taken, and I'd wrestle with whether a year or 2 years. The reason I landed at 2 years, first off, and I think, I'm glad Mr. Bivens is here, and I think he will say amen to this. When the original hog issues came up, there were a lot of surprises to the public, and we made a lot of changes trying to accommodate that. And the reason I am asking for the extension, irregardless of the time period, is there's been enough surprises on this issue, and I would rather err on the side of making sure we've communicated clearly with the public. That's number one. The matter of, and yes, it did say this year, but if we forgot, I do believe others forgot. The second part, the reason for 2 years, is that I didn't want this to become a legislative issue next year. The legislature comes into place in January, and this gave a little extra time if those who have leases wanted to come up with an alternative plan. They could propose it. We don't always have the best idea, and there's some pretty creative folks out there. If they wanted to come to staff and say, what would you consider this? I felt like that gave sufficient time, as opposed to the public feeling like the only alternative I have is to go to the legislature and make this change. So the 2 years was trying to create a window of communication if folks wanted it. And if they didn't want it, it goes by the wayside. That's really it.
Director Carter?
Just a comment or two on how we got to where we are here, and Commissioner Cannon's exactly right. When these things came up and then we got into the part of recognizing that people had land leased and people were expecting to hunt on that particular thing. They were hunting both hogs and whatever else they had in mind when they leased it. So we put the 2-year thing going forward, saying that that's when it would expire. One of the things that makes it difficult is that there is no repository or anything else that keeps up with leases in Tennessee. People aren't required to make notice that they've leased their lands. There's no email address or
or any other kind of address that we could go down and send a notification to. So we would have had to do some kind of overt things, publications or whatever. And admittedly, we haven't done that outside of the hunting guide. And I don't know how many people read the fine print in the hunting guide. So to that point, we haven't made great notification, in part because we don't know who to notify, other than just to say, maybe we'd have news release or something. I don't, so I just want to make that side of it. And one of the reasons the agency didn't come forward and say, yeah, this is what we want to do, because we understand exactly the predicament that Commissioner Cannon is outlining. You know, we have this 22 members of the memorandum of understanding about hog control in Tennessee, and we posed that question to them, and about 79, we actually did a little poll thing, 79% of them said that they would prefer not to extend it at all. So in deference to the group, that was part of the reason we didn't come forward and say we'd like to do that. So that's just the background on it. Certainly it's in y'all's hands of what you want to do with it, and we can go from there.
Let me speak to the poll that was done. I understand the group was asked. Director Carr, however, I also understand that the reason for this extension was maybe not put into context, as far as it's just to assure that we've got proper communication, that the question was just, would you support an extension? If it was put in context of why we're even here, and that is to make sure we got communication, I'm with you. If not, then
It was put into context, the way the question was asked, it was simply, would you support it or not? But I explained it on the front end of the ramifications, just the same thing I just said to you.
okay.
So,
Would it be okay if someone from the agency came back and just gave a little history on what exactly this exemption did in the first place? Just for me and maybe anybody else who, it obviously ended July 31st, but it actually ended at the end of the hog season.
I'm going to call up Chuck Yost. Chuck is the wild hog coordinator for the state, and he's been living this thing for the last year and a half, so I'll let Chuck answer that question.
Thank you, Darrell. You may have to be real specific in your questioning so that I make sure and clear up misunderstandings, but they gave a pretty good history on why it came into place as far as catching people by surprise who had already entered agreements with landowners. And then the landowners obviously wanted to honor those commitments. So that's basically what it boils down to. And you know, they were given 2 years because sometimes these leases can be for multiple years. And one of the challenging things one of the challenging things about this situation is that there's no way to prove when a lease was started, how long it was to continue, and that sort of thing. And even more challenging than that is that they're allowed to have those lease members help with control efforts in addition to 10 designees in the case where they have less than 1,000 acres. In the case where they have more than 1,000 acres, they're allowed an additional designee. So if they had 1,200 acres, they could have 12 designees plus the lease members that were a part of that established lease before September 2011. So there's a whole lot of people that can assist in these control methods, but the time period was in place to, you know, allow some of these exemptions to run out with everybody knowing the circumstances. I know I haven't covered exactly what you're looking for. Maybe if you ask me specifics.
Yes, I think the exemption gave people who were already in leases the chance to help with the eradication efforts on certain lease ground without having to go through the channels of calling Nashville office and getting their designees set.
Right, that would be the landowner's responsibility.
Right, and at the time, there was a concern that we didn't know if 10 hunters was appropriate for some of these large leases. And then going forward, we added another hunter per 100 acres. Is that correct?
That's exactly right.
So,
Yes, sir.
okay, so this basically, by extending this, it just allows somebody in a lease to help with the eradication effort, and they don't have to come through Nashville to get the documentation or
Well, what they, the only basis is that the landowner with an exemption, the landowner is required to get the exemption. But once he's done that, he's allowed those designees plus the lease members. So I guess once the landowner's got it, he's good, okay? So, yeah, that's right, that's exactly right.
Sorry, I'm a little slow on this. So the lease exemption is only good on properties where the landowner already has the exemption, or already has the,
The exemption.
already has the exemption.
Yeah.
They hadn't had the lease prior to.
Yeah,
September.
if they had the lease arrangements before, September 2011.
We don't keep record of leases though.
We don't have those people's names. And that's one of the challenges is those lease members could be out performing this hog control, and then if our officers were to be there to do some sort of inspection, all they've got to say is that, hey, I'm a part of this lease, and it was established before this date. The landowner has an exemption, and they just have to take their word.
You have to get an exemption every year.
Yes, sir, they all expire at the end of December.
How long does that process take?
To get the exemption,
Mhm.
all they've got to do is make a phone call. And that's just to use, that's only to use methods like shooting at night or trapping year-round. That's to go the extra mile. Before that, they're just simply required to, well, they can go out and do these things without that exemption, the landowner.
But if they want designees or people to help, and that's when they have to have an exemption.
Let me jump in here. I believe Kirk picked up on something, and I apologize because I may have missed it, but a landowner does not need to get an exemption to allow, for those people that are on a lease, the landowner doesn't have to get an exemption for those lease members to be able to help with hog eradication. They can shoot throughout the year during daylight hours only. They could also assist in trapping without an exemption, as long as they're on a lease, on a legal lease prior to that opening date. So the only time you need to get an exemption is if you're going to perform things that are above and beyond, which would include shooting at night, trapping during big game seasons, anything like that. Correct?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
So excuse me, Mr. Chairman, the objection you have is that you've got more people doing the eradication than he's asked permission to have. You might have 15 or 20 guys doing it instead of 10. I mean, I don't see what the huge issue is with the lessees getting,
What this,
Killing hogs.
if you want to get to the point of all of this, and probably the main reason why our agency is opposed to it, this continues the tradition of hog hunting. And the longer we continue that, the more problems we have. We are in the process right now of preparing a paper. There is a study that was done out of UT Martin that we work diligently with, and hopefully it'll be published soon, but it shows that the sport hunting of these hogs leads to the spread of the hogs. And so the longer we perpetuate sport hunting by allowing lease members to go there and hunt them, by extending the leases, it continues the sport hunting, and in essence, continue the spread of these animals. And so that's the main, when you boil it down, that's the main reason we want this to expire is the perpetuation of the idea of sport hunting these hogs.
Anybody else? I'm talking too much. When we adopted the original proclamation that's in place today, we did an extension. We did this lease through July 31st for the reason that's been stated. I'm not going to rehash that. It was brought to my attention, and I'm the one who pushed for that back then, that we have deer leases, we even have bear leases in our portion of the state. And basically, without that provision, we were telling those folks, if a hog walks by, and if you're not one of the designees or signees, whatever the appropriate word is, that they couldn't shoot it. In the middle of a deer hunt, middle of a bear hunt, they couldn't do it. When this came up at the last commission meeting, I want to say Daryl, but I'm not trying to put you in a barrel here, that you intentionally brought this up because even staff was going, that, by the way, oh golly, we'd forgotten, this thing's gonna expire, and which I appreciated very much. And at that time, I said, we need to do some type of extension. I thought there was some consensus, maybe not on 2 years, but of having some extension just to make sure we communicate with the public. This isn't just about leasing land for killing hogs. It's about people who are leasing land, who are gonna deer hunt, bear hunt, whatever kind of hunt, and still allow them to have the opportunity to take a hog. I am concerned about the communication, quite frankly. I thought we had a list of these. I think there's at least one other commissioner up here that felt the same way, because we put specific language in there that said it had to be a lease prior to September 2011. And if we didn't have the information, or if we weren't gonna be about getting the information, then we shouldn't have had that clause in there in the first place, because it was wasted ink. Now, that being said, and I respect that there's no record in the state as far as keeping up with leases here. I believe we owe the public more heads up. That's the bottom line in all this. I'm not pushing for you to gather the data. I now understand that we don't have that data. And at the prior, but I believe we owe the public a little more heads up time than just saying this July things are gonna expire, for the reasons I've said before. So I'm probably talking in circles, but I do encourage an extension to that deadline.
Just a final comment. I'll go back to, I don't believe it was wasted ink, Commissioner. And the reason being that there is no, as I said, repository of leases. You have to pick a date. So we had to pick a date of when, going forward from that time, that leases would expire in terms of the being able to hunt hogs. We got some criticism from people who hunt public lands and from people who hunt private lands that aren't leased, that they're not being treated fairly, that people on leases could hunt it, but not those other people. So that was one of the reasons we went forward, and again, in deference to the group that we talked about. So we picked a date. That was the date we went forward with. As I told you in our conversations, this is not like a humongous big deal. It's, if you think it's something we haven't given proper notice on, we can live with an extension. We recognize what I just told you, the criticism we've gotten from people who aren't on leases. The philosophy is if people are going to move hogs around to keep putting them there for the purposes of hunting, then you have to take that incentive away. That, as I've told you all before, really goes against the grain of the staff and the agency and everybody else, because we're a hunting organization and we don't like to put anything saying, hey, from here point, we're not going to hunt that particular animal anymore. But it's a way to control. So if you're going to take that philosophy, and that's what this whole thing is based on, that's why we're saying at some point leasing also has to stop. Otherwise, you have an unfair advantage if you're a leasee as opposed to somebody who hunts on other land. So that going forward. But if you want to give an extension, you feel like we haven't given adequate notice, then it's not one of those fall on your sword deals. If that's what the commission wants to do, it's not that big of a deal. We just want to make sure you knew both sides of it.
Can I make a quick comment? I think to clear up something Harold was talking about there a minute ago, I was under the impression, and he was too, when we first done the lease agreements, and you had a lease prior to September, whenever. I was under the assumption that we had the people's names that were on that lease in each individual lease, which we don't. So that's a moot point. But just as a matter of compromise, why don't we give a year extension, make that it, and then leave the rest of the language in here as it's written? That make everybody happy? Can I make that as a motion? Oh, okay. Well, how do we go about this?
Mr. Chairman, I'll amend my motion to, Proclamation 1309 to I want to amend the present proclamation to end the leases on July 31st, 2014.
I'll give them 1 year, I mean, let's give notice.
Have a motion, do I have a second? Have a motion and a second. This is just the amendment, right?
Yep.
Not the proclamation itself? All right. Any discussion?
Is that correct? What do we put the vote on the amendment or?
You could say proclamation is presented, I guess, but yeah, it'd be better to amend proclamation 13 to include that language.
That's right.
Anyone from the audience?
That's a good picture of the mountain. That is a mountain.
I have a motion and a second on the amendment to Proclamation 13-09. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The amendment passes to Proclamation 13-09.
Now I move approval of Proclamation 1309 as amended.
I have a motion and a second to vote on Proclamation 13-09 as amended. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Proclamation 13-09 as amended passes Wildlife Management Committee. Darrell?
At this point in time, I would like to invite Steve Nifong, Assistant Chief of Law Enforcement and Boating, to go over the manner and means proclamation.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Fairly minor changes to the manner and means this year, with the exception of moving the tagging procedures over from the big game proclamation into manner and means. For legal hunting devices, we changed the wording from air rifles to air guns to reflect pistols or whatever for the small game hunting. We maximized the caliber on air guns at 25 caliber. They're designed to be used for hunting small game, and there are some larger air guns out there that are fully capable of deer hunting, whatever, that we did not feel was appropriate for hunting the small game. And then, excuse me, then we removed nutria from the list of fur bearers because they are already covered in the non-protected wildlife proclamation that you just worked on. Under prohibited acts, we added tracer ammunition. We had a question last year about whether or not it was legal. It probably was covered under the regulation prohibiting the use of full metal jacketed ammunition, but in case they change something where there's a hollow point and a soft point tracer round out there, we did not think it was applicable or good for hunting. There's also a fire danger with this type of ammunition, and we've had some situations in Tennessee in recent years where there's been some fire dangers during our major hunting seasons. We've moved the big game check-in from the big game proclamation into the manner and means to, we felt this was a better place for it. And this is what the regulations will state for this year with your passage. Big game animals shall be checked in at any approved TWA checking station on the TWA website or by the TWA mobile application before leaving the state or being gifted to another and before the end of the calendar day. Evidence of the big game animal species and sex must be available for inspection by TWA personnel until animals checked in. After check-in, documentation on approved TWA forms, TWA mobile application shall be available for inspection by TWA personnel until the time of final processing. This documentation of a confirmed check-in shall accompany any big game animals taken to a taxidermist or meat processor. This reflects the new mobile application that we have where people can check them in by smartphone. It was utilized during the turkey season, and we got a lot of very favorable comments from hunters that utilized that. It continues. We move the bear check-ins over to this as well. All harvested bears must be checked out in any official checking station, that's a physical location, excluding internet and mobile application. Bears must be whole, may be whole or field dressed, but must weigh at least 75 pounds or greater when checked in. And then we have the part that the reproductive sex organs must be attached so we can determine the species if our biologist is there, so we get a proper check-in. And then elk shall be checked in as instructed in the hunter's informational packet when they are drawn for those permits. One slight addition to the miscellaneous, we had a question last year concerning the use of air rifles at the time, or air guns during the archery season. There's a statute, state statute, that makes it illegal to use firearms. But under the Tennessee Code definition of firearms, air rifles did not fall under that, so they were legal. Just to clarify that they are legal, we added that into the miscellaneous, where it says during archery deer bear seasons, a properly licensed big game hunter may use air guns 25 caliber or smaller to hunt small game while archery hunting for deer or bear. During the muzzleloader and gun deer seasons, a legal deer or bear hunter may use rimfire or air guns 25 caliber or smaller to hunt small game. The reasons we did not put the rimfire in for the archery is it's illegal for them to be in possession and hunting with those guns by state statute during the archery only season. That concludes our recommendations, the 2013 manner and means. Be happy to address any questions or concerns.
Oh, let's talk hogs again. That's, no, I've had a request, this came up last year and again this year, and, the way it was presented this year, I believe it's reasonable. Let me just read you what I sent in an earlier email to the chair and Ed. A bear hunter who has filled their daily or seasonal bag limit and who may also be the owner, handler of bear dogs used by a given hunting party may continue to carry a firearm solely for the protection of their dogs/property for the remainder of that day's hunt. The request was that I don't bear hunt, and so I'll probably butcher the description. And Commissioner Teague, I'm gonna lean on you pretty heavy, buddy. But the bears are typically hunted with dogs. That is a hunting party along with the dogs, and that if the handler of those dogs get to the bear first, or if something is happening that they need to shoot another animal, hog or otherwise, let's say they have already shot the bear, technically they should not be in possession of a firearm unless they've got a carry permit, and they would prefer a rifle for hog in the event it's a hog. Based on what I have heard is from our officers and our agency, I don't think that, my understanding is that presents no biological threat. We don't think it's gonna impact the number of bear taken. And if we're doing it for that day, allowing them to continue to carry that rifle for that day only to protect their dogs and others, I personally didn't see a problem with that, and I just want to present it to the committee for consideration. Thank you.
The question for clarification for myself, do you want that added to number 2 under miscellaneous, or do you want that separate?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
When you're bear hunting as a party, could there be more than one bear killed with that group, I'm guessing? Since the daily bags is one per person, I'm assuming, so.
That's correct for the year.
But the party isn't considered a single unit. That was the only clarification I was needing.
Can I get you to state your name, please?
Vance Bivens, I'm president of the Tellico Bear and Boar Club in Tellico Plains, Tennessee, Monroe County. There's a misconception on my part. it was my understanding last year when, and I thoroughly understand why it came up that we could not carry a gun back to the woods with us. Because in Monroe County, we was used to going on the bear hunt to hunt and to take a hog or a bear, either one. We can only kill one bear per year, and that's in most of the states, I think. I hunt in the state of North Carolina, and in order to train my dogs. And but when hog hunting was taken, the privilege was taken away from us. Then, if we killed a bear, then our tag quota was filled. So therefore, technically, we could not go back and take our guns back with us. And when we're up there hunting on the day, up until you kill a bear, and you're allowed to incidentally take a hog. And so, if you kill that bear, all of your privileges are gone. Now, I thought we could take our dogs back the rest of the year if we killed a bear the first day. That was the impression I was under. And aid and help other individuals and use our dogs to run the bear or hogs with them, you know. And at dog food, at premium dog food, right at $30 a bag. There's a lot of people that's concerned about, you know, helping the economy in the state of Tennessee. And when these hog dogs are gone, then it's, and if that person don't take up bear hunting, of course I hunt either one, you know. And but that's going to be a big impact on in the mountainous areas. Monroe County, we understand at one time, was the largest county that purchased hunting license in the state of Tennessee. I have not verified that. We've been told that, and I understand it's backed up considerably. And in fact, I think we're getting a bleed over from North Carolina this year. We have or they have a bill introduced in the North Carolina Senate over there, going up $100 on, and they, I guess they're hearing some of the rattle that the Tennessee hunters they're going to go up, you know, in some other state and take a vacation, and they've been talking this for 2 years, and then get a neighboring state and buy their license in that neighboring state and not even hunt in the state of Tennessee. It's still hard for me to believe of what's happened to us on the hog issue, and I'd like to address the commission on that in just a few minutes. But I was under the impression we could go take those dogs back the rest of the year.
Is the party considered a single unit? That was the question I had. Or could each individual in that party kill a bear? I mean, that's.
And why,
No.
let me
Each
clarify,
individual one.
let's
Okay,
clarify
so
something.
More than one of you is gonna have a gun at one time, right?
If you have a pack of dogs and you personally own the dogs and you shoot a bear, are we saying as an agency that those dogs, because he owns them, can't hunt anymore?
No.
Well, then, it's a party hunt, so how are we shutting down the
Well,
hunt?
now, all of them are not party hunts.
So you're saying there's some individuals just go out by themselves?
Oh, no. But I think that the commission is thinking that there is a drawing in Tellico Plains each year for a party hunt. 75 people goes on in 4 different compartments in Tellico, called the Upper Ball River, Lower Ball River, Upper Tellico, Lower Tellico, and each party, or each one of those compartments, 75 people can go there. Now, that is a party, but 75 people can kill a bear. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
75 people can kill a bear.
But my question is if you kill your bear, you're not gonna quit hunting. I mean, the whole purpose is to run your dogs. Aren't you gonna still be running your dogs?
Well, that's under the impression I thought.
Well, I think that is correct. Am I right?
That's correct.
Why, we're not telling you can't keep hunting your dogs.
The issue is whether or
You're
not
just
he
not
can
gonna
be out there
shoot the
with a gun.
dog, you're just not gonna shoot the bear yourself, but your buddies with license can keep hunting. Am I correct? Am I correct?
If the, this,
Is
this
his dogs
issue,
keep hunting with, and he can take other people with him, but his dogs can keep hunting, correct?
He just can't carry the firearm.
Okay. You can keep hunting.
Yeah, okay.
You're just
for
not gonna
rest
pull the
of year.
trigger.
Okay. Well, I don't pull the trigger anyway.
Well, then I'm saying your dogs are not gonna suffer as far as lack of hunting, is what I'm saying.
Okay. I would, at the end, Mr. Dre, I would like to speak about it.
be fine.
Any other questions?
I didn't make, it was a recommendation of the committee. I'm not on that committee, so I can't make a motion.
They don't need to.
I can bring it back.
I think we're done.
There's no more questions from the commission. This concludes the 2013 season setting recommendations from the agency.
We need to vote on Proclamation 1308.
I make a motion.
Do I have a second? Any discussion? All in favor of Proclamation 13-08 as presented? All opposed? Proclamation 13-08 passes Wildlife Management Committee.
Thank you, sir.
Darrell?
Well, that concludes all the proclamations we are bringing forward for our season setting. However, there is one more item that we need the commission to consider. One of the acts that the commission undertakes is to declare our chronic wasting disease containment zones. And what this is, if you look at a map, chronic wasting disease is a debilitating disease that's always fatal in cervids, especially white-tailed deer here in Tennessee. And we don't have it in the state that we know of. And so what we do to prevent that disease from being introduced into the state of Tennessee, we outline areas of the country that are known to be CWD positive, and we create this containment zone. So if a hunter goes to any of those areas in yellow and harvests any cervid, whether or not it's a white-tailed deer, an elk, a moose, anything in the deer family, before he brings it back, he has to take care of the carcass properly so it minimizes the risk of disease introduction. For example, they've got to debone the meat. We don't want any of the brain matter or the spinal column coming back into Tennessee. But the restrictions are listed down there. We've had this in place for a number of years, and knock on wood, as you can see from the map, the southeast has remained relatively disease-free, and most of the states in the southeast have this restriction. And it is the action of the commission to establish those restricted zones. What you see here is pretty much what we've had. However, what we are asking the commission to do is to expand the restriction zone. And if you saw that fly in, I'll show my pointer. We want to add 2 more counties in the state of Pennsylvania. These 2 counties were now declared by the state of Pennsylvania as being CWD positive. Obviously, we are not going to have many hunters affected by this because probably not many Tennessee hunters goes to those individual counties. However, if they do, they would have to properly care for their deer carcass before they brought it into the state. And so we're requesting action from the Wildlife Committee to add Bedford and Blair counties to the CWD containment zone, and those 2 counties are located in the state of Pennsylvania.
Any discussion? All in favor? All opposed? Wildlife Committee votes, passes, adding those counties to the CWD containment zone. Darrell?
That concludes my part of the discussion. Thank you, Commission.
Just take a little pause.